The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Zach Harrington's ranch as he stood silently at his wife's grave. 3 years had passed since typhoid fever had claimed Sarah, but time had done little to heal his wounded heart. The small wooden cross, weathered by Wyoming's harsh elements, bore only her name and the dates that marked her brief 26 years of life. Behind him, the once thriving Rafter H Ranch had fallen into disrepair, much like its owner. It was 1879, and the promise of the frontier that had once drawn them westward from Pennsylvania now seemed like a cruel joke. Zach removed his hat, running calloused fingers through dark hair now streaked with premature gray at 32. The evening wind carried the scent of sage and coming rain as he placed a wildflower on the small mound of earth. "I miss you, Sarah," he whispered, the words carried away by the wind. Every damn day, the sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled him from his reverie. Reluctantly, he turned from the small family plot on the hill overlooking the ranch house to see his foreman, Hank Miller, riding hard toward him. Zach replaced his hat, squaring his shoulders as the older man approached. "Boss," Hank called, reining in his dun gelding. "Stage just dropped someone off at the gate. Says she's here about the position." Zach's brow furrowed. "Position?" "The advertisement you placed in the Denver paper for help around the ranch house." Recognition dawned on Zach's face, followed by a flicker of annoyance. He'd placed that advertisement months ago during a moment of desperate clarity, when he'd finally acknowledged he couldn't manage the ranch and household alone. He'd received no responses and had forgotten all about it. "Send her away," Zach said, turning back toward the grave. "I've changed my mind." Hank cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Might be difficult, boss. She's got trunks with her. Came all the way from Boston, she says." Zach cursed under his breath. "Boston? What the hell does a Boston woman know about ranch life?" "Don't rightly know," Hank replied, "but she's standing at your front gate in a mighty fine dress looking like she's expecting to be welcomed." With a last glance at Sarah's grave, Zach nodded curtly and mounted his horse. The ride down to the gate was short, but gave him time to compose his thoughts. He'd simply explain the mistake and send her on her way, perhaps with enough money for a room in town until the next eastbound stage. As the gate came into view, Zach saw her, a slender figure in a dusty blue traveling dress, standing beside 2 worn leather trunks. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she shielded her eyes against the setting sun as she watched his approach. "Madam," Zach said, dismounting and tipping his hat with cold formality. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not looking for help at present." The woman straightened, and Zach was struck by the quiet determination in her green eyes. "Mr. Harrington, I'm Rebecca Morgan. I've traveled over 1,000 miles in response to your advertisement, sir. It specifically stated you needed someone to manage household affairs and assist with correspondence." She reached into her handbag and produced a folded newspaper clipping. "I have your advertisement right here." Zach reluctantly took the paper, recognizing his own words. He'd been drinking when he'd written it, desperate for some relief from the crushing loneliness of the empty house. "That was months ago, Miss Morgan. Circumstances have changed, have they?" She glanced past him at the ranch house with its sagging porch and neglected appearance. "It doesn't appear so." Her directness caught him off guard. Most women would have wilted under his cold reception, but Rebecca Morgan stood her ground, her chin lifted slightly in defiance. "I'm a hard worker, Mr. Harrington. I'm educated, organized, and not afraid of physical labor. I left everything behind to come here." Her voice remained steady, but he detected a note of desperation. "I need this position." Zach studied her more carefully. Her clothes were of good quality, but showed signs of wear. There were shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of exhaustion and worry. Whatever had driven her to answer an advertisement for work on a remote Wyoming ranch must have been compelling. "Why would a Boston lady want to bury herself on a cattle ranch?" he asked bluntly. A flash of something pain perhaps crossed her face before she composed herself. "My reasons are my own, Mr. Harrington, just as I imagine yours were when you placed the advertisement." They stood in silence for a moment, the tension between them palpable. Finally, Zach sighed. "1 month," he said gruffly. "I'll give you a trial of 1 month. If it doesn't work out, I'll pay your fare back east." Relief washed over her face, though she quickly masked it with a businesslike nod. That seems fair, thank you. Zach motioned to Hank, who had been hovering discreetly nearby. Help Miss Morgan with her trunks. He turned back to Rebecca. The house hasn't seen a woman's touch in 3 years. It's not what you're used to. I didn't come expecting luxury, Mr. Harrington. As Hank loaded her trunks onto the wagon, Zach mounted his horse, suddenly uncomfortable with the prospect of having this stranger in his home in Sarah's home. We eat at sundown, he said curtly, before turning his horse and riding ahead to the ranch house, leaving Rebecca to follow in the wagon with Hank. Zach entered the house, suddenly seeing it through a stranger's eyes, the layer of dust on the mantelpiece, the unwashed dishes in the kitchen, the boots and saddle gear scattered about. He'd stopped noticing such things long ago, but now he felt a stab of shame. Sarah would have been mortified. He grabbed a shirt from the back of a chair and stuffed it into a drawer just as the front door opened. Rebecca Morgan stood in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral as she surveyed the room. Where would you like me to put my things, Mr. Harrington? Second door on the right, upstairs, he answered, pointing to the narrow staircase. It was, he stopped himself. It's the guest room. If she noticed his slip, she gave no indication. Thank you. I'll get settled and then perhaps you could show me around. I'd like to familiarize myself with the house before I begin work tomorrow. Zach nodded stiffly. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. He fled the house, seeking refuge in the familiar smells and sounds of the stable. Inside, he leaned against his gelding's stall, breathing deeply. Having a woman in the house again, it felt like a betrayal of Sarah's memory somehow. Yet even in his grief-stricken state, he recognized the ranch house needed attention that he couldn't provide while also managing the cattle operation. An hour later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Zach reluctantly returned to the house. He stopped short in the doorway, momentarily disoriented. The main room had been transformed. The floor was swept, the surfaces dusted, and the scattered items organized. A lamp burned on the table, which was set for a meal. Rebecca emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron she'd found somewhere. I hope you don't mind, she said. I thought I'd make myself useful right away. The aroma of cooking food reached him, making his stomach growl. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a proper meal at his own table. You didn't have to do that tonight, he said, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. I wanted to, she replied simply. Dinner will be ready shortly. It's nothing fancy, just beans and biscuits. I worked with what I found in the pantry. Zach nodded awkwardly and moved to wash up at the basin near the back door. When he returned, Rebecca was placing a steaming pot on the table. They ate in uncomfortable silence, Zach keeping his eyes on his plate. The food was simple but well prepared, better than anything he'd eaten in months. This is good, he said finally, breaking the silence. Thank you. Rebecca smiled slightly. You're welcome. Tomorrow I'll need to take inventory of the pantry and make a list of supplies. Is there a town nearby where I can purchase what we need? Sweetwater's about 10 miles east, Zach replied. Hank makes a supply run every 2 weeks. I see, she hesitated. Mr. Harrington, I noticed the state of the linens and some repairs needed around the house. Would you prefer I focus on those tasks first, or is there other work you consider more pressing? Her practical approach made it easier for him to respond. This wasn't about Sarah or his grief, it was about the running of the ranch. Whatever you think best, he said. I've let things go. The men eat at the bunkhouse, so you'll only need to cook for the 2 of us. There's correspondence that needs attending to, bills, cattle sales, that sort of thing. I've been putting it off. Rebecca nodded. I can certainly help with that. I worked as a secretary in Boston for several years. Curiosity got the better of him. What made you leave? A shadow crossed her face. As I said earlier, my reasons are my own. The rebuff was gentle but clear. Zach nodded, respecting her privacy even as his curiosity deepened. Whatever her story, Rebecca Morgan had secrets of her own. After dinner, he retreated to the porch with a cup of coffee, watching as the stars appeared in the vast Wyoming sky. Through the window, he could see Rebecca moving about the kitchen, cleaning up. The simple domesticity of the scene caused an unexpected ache in his chest. Later that night, lying in his bed, Zach found himself listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person moving about the house. Footsteps passed his door, followed by the soft click of the guest room door closing. For the first time in 3 years, he wasn't alone in the house. "I don't know about this, Sarah," he whispered into the darkness. "It feels wrong somehow." But as sleep finally claimed him, Zach had to admit that the clean sheets and the warm meal in his stomach made for the most comfortable night he'd had in a very long time. The next morning, Zach woke to the unfamiliar smell of coffee brewing and bacon frying. For a disorienting moment, he thought Sarah was downstairs, and the past 3 years had been nothing but a terrible dream. Reality crashed back as he remembered his new employee. Downstairs, Rebecca stood at the stove, her hair neatly pinned up, wearing a simple brown dress with an apron. She turned at his approach, offering a polite smile. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington. I hope you slept well." "Well enough," he replied, pouring himself coffee from the pot on the stove. "You're up early. I'm accustomed to early hours." She placed a plate of eggs and bacon on the table. "Please, eat while it's hot. I've already made a start on the laundry." Zach sat down, uncomfortable with being waited on but unable to deny his appreciation for the hot meal. "The men will be moving the herd to the north pasture today. I'll be gone most of the day." Rebecca nodded. "I'll use the time to thoroughly clean the house and take inventory." She hesitated. "Mr. Harrington, I found a locked room upstairs, the third door on the left." Zach's jaw tightened. "That room is private. I'd appreciate if you left it alone." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Of course, I apologize for the intrusion." An awkward silence fell between them. Zach finished his breakfast quickly and stood. "I should get to work. Thank you for breakfast." Outside, the day was already warming as Zach saddled his horse. The sound of singing drifted from the open window of the house, a gentle, melodic tune he didn't recognize. He paused, listening for a moment before mounting up and riding toward the cattle pens where his men were gathering. Hank rode up alongside him. "The new lady's settling in all right, seems to be," Zach replied noncommittally. "Good cook." "Good enough," Hank grinned. "Mighty pretty too." Zach shot him a warning glance. "She's an employee, Hank, that's all." "Sure, boss," Hank replied, though his expression remained amused. "Just saying it's nice to see a woman around the place again." Zach didn't respond, urging his horse ahead to join the other cowhands. Work was what he needed now, hard, physical labor that would leave no room for complicated thoughts about Rebecca Morgan. The day passed in a blur of dust, sweat, and the rhythmic movements of cattle. When Zach finally returned to the ranch house as dusk was falling, he was exhausted and filthy. He paused at the door, struck by the transformation. The windows gleamed in the setting sun, the porch had been swept clean, and a pot of wildflowers sat on the small table beside the rocking chair. Inside, the change was even more dramatic. Every surface shone, the floor had been scrubbed, and the lingering smell of neglect had been replaced with the scent of soap and something delicious cooking. Rebecca emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're back," she said, smiling slightly. "Dinner will be ready soon if you'd like to wash up." Zach nodded, acutely aware of the trail dust covering him from head to toe. "You've been busy," he observed, glancing around the room. "There was much to do," she replied simply. "I hope you don't mind, but I found some curtains in a chest and hung them. They needed airing, but they're quite lovely." Zach's throat tightened as he recognized the floral patterns Sarah had chosen years ago. "They were my wife's," he said, his voice rough. Rebecca's expression softened. "I'm sorry, I should have asked before." "No," he interrupted. "It's fine. They should be used, not stored away." He escaped to wash up, grateful for the moment alone to compose himself. When he returned, Rebecca had set the table with Sarah's good dishes, another item long stored away. The meal was the best he'd eaten in years: roast chicken with potatoes and carrots, and fresh bread that filled the house with its homey aroma. "Where did you find a chicken?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Your foreman, Hank, was kind enough to bring one by this afternoon." "He mentioned you had an arrangement with the Jensen farm for eggs and poultry." Zach nodded, remembering the long-standing trade agreement he'd nearly forgotten about. "You've accomplished a lot in one day." Rebecca smiled, looking pleased with the compliment. "Thank you. I also organized your correspondence. There are several matters requiring your attention when you have time. After dinner, Zach settled at his desk in the corner of the main room while Rebecca cleared the table. He was surprised to find his papers neatly stacked, with the most urgent items on top, each with a small note attached explaining what action was needed. "You've done this kind of work before," he observed as Rebecca passed by with a tray of dishes. "Yes. I was secretary to a shipping merchant in Boston for 5 years. She paused. "If you'd like, I could draft replies for your approval. It might save you time." Zach considered the offer. The business side of ranching had always been Sarah's domain, and since her death, he'd let it slide dangerously. "That would be helpful," he admitted. As the evening progressed, Zach found himself watching Rebecca as she moved about the house, her efficiency both impressive and slightly unnerving. She had transformed his home in a single day, bringing order to the chaos that had reigned for 3 years. Later, as he prepared for bed, Zach paused at Sarah's door, the locked room Rebecca had mentioned. He rarely entered it anymore, the preserved shrine to his wife too painful to face. But tonight, he turned the key and stepped inside. Everything remained as it had been: Sarah's brush on the dressing table, her shawl draped over the chair, the book she'd been reading still open to the last page she'd turned. Dust covered everything now, a visible marker of time's passage. Zach sat heavily on the edge of the bed, running his hand over the faded quilt. "I don't know what I'm doing, Sarah," he whispered, "bringing a stranger into our home, but you'd hate what I've let it become." The room offered no answers, only the hollow echo of his loss. Eventually, he locked the door behind him and returned to his own room, where sleep eluded him for hours. The days fell into a rhythm as April gave way to May. Rebecca proved herself invaluable, not only managing the household but bringing order to the ranch's accounts and correspondence. She discovered that several payments for cattle sales had never been collected and diplomatically resolved issues with suppliers who had been overcharging for years. Zach found himself increasingly comfortable with her presence, though he maintained a careful distance. He was polite but reserved, sharing meals and occasional conversation, but volunteering little about himself or his past. Rebecca seemed to understand his boundaries, never pushing for more than he was willing to give. She was equally reserved about her own history, deflecting personal questions with practiced ease. One evening in mid-May, as they sat on the porch after dinner, the silence between them was companionable rather than strained. The sunset painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples, a spectacular display even by Wyoming standards. "It's beautiful here," Rebecca said softly. "I understand now why people are drawn to this land." Zach nodded, watching the colors deepen. Sarah fell in love with it instantly. "We came west right after we married. She said the sky here made her feel like she could breathe for the first time." It was the first time he'd voluntarily mentioned his wife, and Rebecca seemed to recognize the significance of the moment. She remained quiet, allowing him to continue if he wished. "We had nothing when we arrived," he went on, surprising himself with the desire to share this piece of his past. "Built everything from scratch. This house, the barn, the corrals. Sarah planted those wildflowers by the gate, said every home needed something beautiful to welcome visitors." Rebecca smiled. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. Zach's voice roughened. "Fever took her 3 years ago, came on sudden. Doctor from town couldn't do anything. She was gone in less than a week." "I'm so sorry," Rebecca said, her voice gentle. "That kind of loss. It changes everything." Something in her tone made Zach look at her more closely. "You speak from experience." Rebecca gazed out at the darkening landscape. "My husband died 2 years ago, shipyard accident." The revelation surprised him. "I didn't realize you were a widow, Mrs. Morgan seemed too formal for our working arrangement," she explained. And Rebecca felt safer somehow. Zach nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. "How long were you married?" 3 years, not long enough." A sad smile touched her lips. "Daniel was kind and hardworking. We were happy." The shared grief created a new understanding between them. Zach found himself asking, "Is that why you came west? To escape the memories?" Rebecca hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Partly. After Daniel died, I returned to work, but Boston held too many reminders, and then there were complications with Daniel's family. When I saw your advertisement, it seemed like providence. Zach sensed there was more to her story, but he respected her right to privacy. After all, he had his own secrets, his own pain he wasn't ready to share. As darkness fell completely, they retreated inside. Rebecca lit the lamps while Zach stoked the fire against the evening chill. For the first time, the routine felt natural, as if they'd been sharing this space for years rather than weeks. That night, Zach dreamed of Sarah. Not the feverish, dying Sarah who haunted his nightmares, but Sarah as she had been in life, laughing, vibrant, full of plans for their future. In the dream, she stood in a field of wildflowers, smiling at him. "It's time, Zach," she said, her voice carried on the wind. "Time to live again." He woke with tears on his face, but a curious lightness in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Zach was checking fence lines in the east pasture when he spotted a wagon approaching the ranch house. He recognized it as belonging to Alina Jensen, widow of his neighbor and longtime friend, Tom Jensen, who had died the previous winter. Curious and slightly concerned unexpected visitors usually meant trouble. Zach rode back to the house. By the time he arrived, Rebecca had already welcomed Alina and her daughter Mary, a girl of about 16, into the house and was serving coffee at the kitchen table. "Zach Harrington," Alina exclaimed, rising to greet him. "I hardly recognized the place. When Mary and I rode by last month, it looked like a ghost was running things. Now look at it." Zach removed his hat, uncomfortable with the implied criticism but unable to deny its truth. "Mrs. Jensen, Mary, this is a surprise." "A pleasant one, I hope," Alina replied, her shrewd eyes moving between Zach and Rebecca. "We've come to invite you both to our spring social this Saturday. The whole county will be there." "That's very kind," Rebecca began, "but I'm just Mr. Harrington's housekeeper." "I wouldn't want to presume." "Nonsense," Alina interrupted. "Everyone's curious about you, my dear. We so rarely get new faces in these parts, especially ones that work such transformations." She gestured around the kitchen, which now gleamed with cleanliness and order. Zach shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not one for socials, Alina, you know that." Alina's expression softened. "It's been 3 years, Zach. Sarah wouldn't want you living like a hermit forever." The mention of Sarah's name in front of Rebecca made Zach tense. "I'll think about it," he said non-committally. After the Jensen women departed, with Alina extracting a promise from Rebecca to at least attend even if Zach wouldn't, an awkward silence fell between them. "You should go," Zach said finally, hanging his hat by the door. "It would be good for you to meet people." Rebecca studied him. "And you, will you come?" Zach shook his head. "I haven't been much for socializing since." He trailed off. "Since Sarah died," Rebecca finished gently. "I understand truly. After Daniel, I could barely stand to be around happy people. Their laughter felt like an insult to my grief." The accuracy of her observation startled him. "Yes," he admitted. "Exactly that." Rebecca moved to the stove, busying herself with preparing lunch. "But there comes a point, Mr. Harrington, when hiding from life becomes a habit rather than a necessity." She glanced at him over her shoulder. "At least, that's what I've found." The insight struck uncomfortably close to home. Zach had built walls around his grief, using it as an excuse to withdraw from the community and friends who had once been an important part of his life. "I'll consider it," he said finally, surprising himself with the concession. Rebecca smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes and momentarily transformed her face. Zach realized with a start that she was beautiful not in the delicate, golden way that Sarah had been, but with a quiet strength and grace that was entirely her own. The thought disturbed him, and he quickly turned away, mumbling something about checking on the horses before striding out of the house. In the barn, Zach methodically brushed his gelding, finding comfort in the repetitive motion and the animal's steady presence. "What am I doing, old boy?" he murmured to the horse, "getting all tangled up in feelings I have no business having." Yet as the week progressed, Zach found himself watching Rebecca, more closely noticing the graceful way she moved, the quiet humor that occasionally broke through her reserved demeanor. the intelligence evident in her handling of the ranch's business affairs. On Saturday morning, Zach surprised himself and clearly Rebecca by announcing at breakfast that he would attend the Jensen social after all. "You will." Rebecca couldn't hide her pleased surprise. "What changed your mind?" Zach shrugged, uncomfortable with explaining his complex motivations. "Thought it might be good for business," he said, though they both knew it was more than that. As the afternoon approached, Zach found himself unexpectedly nervous. He shaved carefully, nicking himself twice in the process, and pulled out his good suit unworn since Sarah's funeral. It hung loosely on his frame. He'd lost weight in the years since. When Rebecca emerged from her room, Zach's breath caught. She wore a simple dress of deep blue that complemented her auburn hair, which she'd arranged in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun. A small cameo hung at her throat, a memento of her husband, perhaps. "You look very nice," he managed, the words inadequate for the transformation before him. Rebecca smiled, a blush coloring her cheeks. "Thank you. It's been a long time since I had occasion to dress up." The ride to the Jensen farm was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached, the sounds of music and laughter drifted on the air. Lanterns hung from trees, illuminating the yard where tables had been set up for food and a space cleared for dancing. Their arrival caused a stir. Many of the gathered ranchers and townspeople had known Zach for years, but had rarely seen him since Sarah's death. The sight of him arriving with an unknown woman set tongues wagging immediately. Alina Jensen bustled forward, clearly delighted by their presence. "Zach, Rebecca. I'm so pleased you both came." She linked her arm through Rebecca's. "Come, my dear, let me introduce you to everyone." Rebecca threw a slightly panicked glance over her shoulder as Alina led her away. Zach found himself smiling at her expression, then quickly composed his features as several of his neighboring ranchers approached. "Harrington," said Bill Cooper, extending his hand. "Good to see you out and about." "Cooper," Zach acknowledged, shaking the offered hand. "That your new housekeeper?" asked Frank Mills, nodding toward Rebecca, who was now surrounded by a group of curious women. "Miss Morgan." "Yes," Zach replied stiffly. The men exchanged knowing glances that made Zach bristle. "It's not like that," he said sharply. "She works for me, that's all." Cooper raised his hands in a placating gesture. "No offense meant, Harrington. Just good to see you moving forward, is all." Before Zach could respond, the small band struck up a lively tune, and couples began to form for dancing. He watched as a young cowboy from the Cooper Ranch approached Rebecca, clearly asking her to dance. She smiled politely but shook her head, her eyes scanning the crowd until they met Zach's across the yard. Without conscious decision, Zach found himself moving toward her. The women around Rebecca parted as he approached, their curious gazes following him. "Miss Morgan," he said formally, extending his hand. "Would you care to dance?" Surprise and something warmer flashed in her eyes. "I would, Mr. Harrington, thank you." As he led her to the dancing area, Zach was acutely aware of the attention they were attracting. It had been years since he danced, not since Sarah, and he felt stiff and awkward as he placed his hand at Rebecca's waist. "I'm out of practice," he warned as they began to move to the music. Rebecca smiled up at him. "You're doing fine. It's like riding a horse the body remembers even when the mind forgets." As they moved together, Zach gradually relaxed. Rebecca was a good dancer, following his lead effortlessly. The warmth of her hand in his, the subtle scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the graceful way she moved all combined to create a moment of unexpected joy. "Thank you for coming today," Rebecca said softly. "I know it wasn't easy for you." Zach met her gaze. "Strangely enough, it's not as difficult as I expected." The dance ended too soon, and Zach reluctantly released her. Before he could speak again, Mary Jensen appeared, pulling Rebecca away to introduce her to more people. Zach found himself watching her throughout the evening, aware of a growing tension in his chest whenever another man approached her. As twilight deepened into night, Zach sought refuge on the edge of the gathering. The social would continue for hours yet, with dancing and storytelling lasting well into the night. He stood in the shadows of a large oak tree, nursing a cup of cider and observing the festivities from a distance. "She's quite something, your Miss Morgan." Zach turned to find Alina Jensen beside him, her shrewd eyes following his gaze to where Rebecca stood laughing with a group of women. "She's not my Miss Morgan," Zach replied automatically. "She works for me." Alina made a non-committal sound. "Is that all?" Zach shifted uncomfortably. "What are you getting at, Alina?" the older woman sighed. "I was friends with Sarah since we were girls, Zach. No one misses her more than I do, except you, but she wouldn't want this for you this half-life you've been living." "I'm managing," Zach said stiffly. "Are you?" "Before that young woman arrived, you were wasting away before our eyes. Now look at you clean-shaven, dressed properly, actually speaking to people again." Alina placed a weathered hand on his arm. "It's all right to live again, Zach, to feel something for someone new." Before Zach could respond, Rebecca approached, her cheeks flushed from dancing. "There you are," she said, smiling. "I was beginning to think you'd left without me." "Just getting some air," Zach replied, inexplicably relieved to see her. Alina excused herself with a knowing smile, leaving them alone beneath the oak tree. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Zach asked, genuinely curious. Rebecca nodded. "Everyone has been very kind, though I suspect I've been thoroughly examined and gossiped about." "Small communities," Zach said with a shrug. "New faces are rare. Single women working for widowed ranchers even rarer, I imagine," Rebecca added with a wry smile. The observation hung between them, acknowledging the unconventional nature of their arrangement. In the distance, the band began a slower, more melodic tune. "Would you care for another dance?" Zach found himself asking. Rebecca's smile deepened. "I would very much." This time, as they moved together, Zach was aware of a shift between them, a new awareness that had nothing to do with employer and employee. Rebecca fit perfectly in his arms, as if she belonged there, and the realization both thrilled and terrified him. "You're very quiet," she observed as they swayed to the music. "Just thinking," he replied. "About," Zach met her gaze. "About how things change, how people change." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Are you changing, Mr. Harrington?" "I think perhaps I am," he admitted. "And I'm not entirely sure what to do about it." Rebecca's hand tightened slightly in his. "Sometimes change happens whether we're ready for it or not." The honesty of the moment stretched between them, fragile and profound. As the music ended, Zach reluctantly stepped back, releasing her but maintaining their gaze. "It's getting late," he said finally. "Perhaps we should head back to the ranch." Rebecca nodded, though he thought he detected a flicker of disappointment in her expression. "Of course." The ride home was filled with a new tension, unspoken feelings that neither was ready to acknowledge. As they approached the ranch house, the moon cast long shadows across the yard, bathing everything in silver light. Zach helped Rebecca down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for convincing me to attend," he said softly. "It was good to be among friends again." Rebecca smiled up at him. "Thank you for the dances. It's been a long time since I enjoyed an evening so much." They stood close in the moonlight, the air between them charged with possibility. For a breathless moment, Zach thought he might lean down and kiss her wanted to, with an intensity that startled him. Instead, he stepped back, the ghost of Sarah suddenly between them. "Good night, Rebecca," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Good night, Zach," she replied, using his given name for the first time. As she turned and walked into the house, Zach remained in the yard, his emotions in turmoil. He was attracted to Rebecca, had been almost from the beginning, though he'd refused to acknowledge it. But the guilt was overwhelming. How could he feel this way about another woman when Sarah had been his whole world? Later, unable to sleep, Zach found himself at Sarah's grave once more. The moon illuminated the small cross, casting long shadows across the grassy mound. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "It feels like betrayal to even think about her that way, but I can't stop." The night offered no answers, only the soft rustle of wind through prairie grass and the distant howl of a coyote. Eventually, Zach returned to the house, passing Rebecca's door with a mixture of longing and confusion. June brought scorching heat and the busiest time of the ranching year. Zach threw himself into work, grateful for the distraction from his complicated feelings. He spent long days in the saddle, often returning to the ranch house after Rebecca had retired for the night. For her part, Rebecca seemed to sense his need for distance and respected it, though he occasionally caught her watching him with a questioning expression. Their interactions became politely formal again, the warmth that had developed between them carefully contained. One blistering afternoon, as Zach and his men were branding calves in the far pasture, a rider approached at a gallop. It was Bobby, the young stable hand, his face flushed with exertion. "Boss," he called, reining his horse to a sliding stop. "There's trouble at the house," Zach's heart lurched. "Rebecca, she's fine, but there's men there, 3 of them. Showed up asking for her by name. Miss Morgan told me to fetch you quick." Without waiting for further explanation, Zach mounted his horse and rode hard for the ranch house, fear and anger propelling him forward. As he approached, he saw 3 horses hitched to the rail and 3 well-dressed men standing on his porch. Rebecca stood in the doorway, her posture rigid. "What's going on here?" Zach demanded, dismounting in a cloud of dust. The oldest of the men, a distinguished-looking gentleman in his 60s, turned to face him. "Ah, you must be Mr. Harrington. I'm Edward Morgan, Rebecca's father-in-law. These are my sons, James and Thomas." Zach moved to stand beside Rebecca, noting her pale face and the slight tremor in her hands. "What brings you all the way from Boston, Mr. Morgan?" Edward Morgan's smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "Family business, Mr. Harrington. My daughter-in-law left rather abruptly. We've come to bring her home where she belongs." Rebecca's voice was steady despite her obvious distress. "As I've already explained, I have no intention of returning to Boston. My life is here now." "Don't be ridiculous, Rebecca," said the younger of the brothers, his tone condescending. "A woman of your breeding has no place in this wilderness. Father has been more than generous in his offer." Zach looked at Rebecca questioningly. She met his gaze, a silent plea in her eyes. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside," he suggested, placing a protective hand at the small of her back. Once seated in the main room, the tension was palpable. Edward Morgan surveyed the house with barely concealed disdain before fixing his gaze on Rebecca. "I'll be direct, Rebecca. Your continued independence is causing talk in Boston. It reflects poorly on our family name. I'm prepared to increase your allowance if you'll return and assume a more appropriate lifestyle." "An appropriate lifestyle," Rebecca repeated, her voice tight with controlled anger. "You mean living under your thumb, marrying whichever business associate you deem suitable?" Edward's expression hardened. "My son has been dead for 2 years. It's time you moved on in a manner befitting a Morgan." "I have moved on," Rebecca replied, "just not in the way you planned." The older brother, James, leaned forward. "Be reasonable, Rebecca. You can't possibly prefer this," he gestured dismissively around the room, "to the life you had in Boston." "I prefer my freedom," she said simply. Zach had remained silent, observing the exchange with growing understanding. This, then, was the complication Rebecca had alluded to: a controlling father-in-law who viewed her as property to be managed. "Miss Morgan is welcome here for as long as she chooses to stay," Zach said firmly. "She's earned her place on this ranch, and I won't have her harassed." Edward Morgan's cold gaze shifted to Zach. "I see. And what exactly is her place here, Mr. Harrington? The arrangement seems unusual." The implication was clear, and Zach felt his temper rise. "Miss Morgan is my housekeeper and business manager. Her character is beyond reproach, as is mine." "Is it?" Thomas Morgan sneered. "A widow living alone with an unmarried man. Perhaps Boston society would find that less shocking than I do, but I doubt it." Rebecca stood abruptly. "That's enough. My reputation is not yours to defend or question. I've built a new life here, and I have no intention of abandoning it to satisfy your sense of propriety." Edward Morgan rose as well, his expression darkening. "You forget yourself, Rebecca. Your financial security depends entirely on my goodwill. The allowance I've provided can be withdrawn as easily as it was given." "Then withdraw it," Rebecca said, lifting her chin. "I earn my own way now." A tense silence followed her declaration. Finally, Edward nodded stiffly. "Very well, if that's your decision, so be it. But don't come crawling back when you realize what you've thrown away." With that, the Morgan men departed, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Zach watched through the window as they mounted their horses and rode away, their stiff backs radiating displeasure. When he turned back to Rebecca, she was standing very still, her face pale but composed. "I apologize for bringing my troubles to your doorstep," she said quietly. "You have nothing to apologize for," Zach replied, moving closer to her. "Are you all right?" Rebecca nodded, though her eyes betrayed her distress. "I knew they might come eventually, but I hoped they'd simply let me go." "Why didn't you tell me about them?" Zach asked gently. Rebecca sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "It's not something I'm proud of being essentially owned by my in-laws. After Daniel died, his father took control of everything, including me. The allowance he mentioned was my leash, his way of ensuring I remained under his influence. And now?" Zach asked, concerned about the implications of Edward Morgan's threat. A small, determined smile touched Rebecca's lips. "Now I'm truly independent for the first time in my life. It's terrifying and exhilarating all at once." Zach sat beside her, moved by her courage. "You're not alone, Rebecca. Whatever happens, you have a place here." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them, once more a deepening of trust and understanding that transcended their roles as employer and employee. "Thank you," Rebecca said softly. "That means more than you know." That evening, they sat together on the porch long after dinner, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. The encounter with the Morgans had broken down some of the barriers between them, creating a new intimacy neither had anticipated. "Will they come back, do you think?" Zach asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Rebecca shook her head. "I don't believe so. Edward Morgan doesn't waste time on lost causes, and he now considers me exactly that." She smiled wryly. "In his own way, he probably thinks he was being kind, saving me from myself." "Some kindness," Zach observed. "He loved his son," Rebecca said, her voice softening. "After Daniel died, I think holding on to me was his way of keeping a part of Daniel alive, but his love is possessive, controlling. I couldn't breathe in that house." Zach nodded, understanding all too well the suffocating nature of grief. "Is that why you answered my advertisement? To escape?" "Partly," Rebecca admitted. "But also because I wanted to build something new, something that was entirely my own." She glanced at him. "I never expected to find what I've found here." The weight of her words hung between them, full of unspoken meaning. Zach's heart hammered in his chest as he considered what she might be saying, what he wanted her to be saying. "And what have you found, Rebecca?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She met his gaze steadily. "Purpose, peace, and something I thought I'd never feel again after Daniel died." She paused, gathering courage. "I've found myself caring for you, Zach, more than I should as your employee." The confession, so simply stated, struck Zach with the force of a physical blow. His own feelings, which he'd been fighting for weeks, surged to the surface, demanding acknowledgement. "I've been fighting it," he admitted roughly. "Feeling as though I'm betraying Sarah's memory by even thinking of you that way." Rebecca's expression softened with understanding. "I know. I felt the same about Daniel at first, as if my heart only had room for one love in a lifetime. And now," Zach asked, hardly daring to hope, "now I understand that loving again doesn't diminish what I had with Daniel. It honors it." She reached out, tentatively placing her hand over his. "The heart expands to make room for new love. It doesn't replace the old." The wisdom of her words resonated deeply with Zach. For the first time, he allowed himself to fully acknowledge his feelings for Rebecca, not as a betrayal of Sarah, but as a continuation of life's journey. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Zach leaned forward. Rebecca met him halfway, her lips soft against his in a gentle, questioning kiss. When they parted, Zach saw his own wonder reflected in her eyes. "I never expected this," he murmured, reaching up to touch her cheek. "Never thought I'd feel this way again." Rebecca smiled, leaning into his touch. "Neither did I, but here we are." They sat together on the porch until the moon rose high in the sky, talking of their pasts and cautiously exploring the possibility of a shared future. When they finally went inside, Zach walked Rebecca to her door, reluctant to end the evening. "Good night, Rebecca," he said, kissing her once more, lingering in the sweetness of the moment. "Good night, Zach," she replied, her smile holding a promise of tomorrows to come. As July turned to August, Zach and Rebecca's relationship deepened. They moved carefully, respecting the memories of those they had lost while embracing the new love growing between them. To Zach's surprise, he found that opening his heart to Rebecca didn't diminish his love for Sarah instead. It seemed to heal wounds he'd thought would never close. Rebecca continued her work as housekeeper and business manager, but their evenings were now spent together, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. Zach found himself laughing again, planning again, living again in a way he hadn't since Sarah's death. One Sunday afternoon, Zach took Rebecca riding to his favorite spot on the ranch, a high ridge overlooking the valley, where wildflowers grew in abundance and the view stretched for miles in every direction. "It's breathtaking," Rebecca said, dismounting to stand at the edge of the ridge. "I can see why you love it here," Zach joined her, taking her hand in his. "Sarah and I used to picnic here when we first arrived. She said it made her feel closer to heaven." The fact that he could mention Sarah without pain, could share her memory with Rebecca, felt like a victory over grief's tyranny. Rebecca squeezed his hand. "Thank you for bringing me here, for sharing this with me." They spread a blanket beneath a solitary oak tree and enjoyed the simple meal. Rebecca had packed fried chicken, biscuits, and apple pie. As they ate, Zach found himself watching Rebecca, marveling at how naturally she had become part of his life. "What are you thinking?" she asked, catching his thoughtful gaze. Zach smiled. "That I'm the luckiest man in Wyoming." A blush colored Rebecca's cheeks. "Flatterer. Honest man," he corrected, reaching for her hand. "Rebecca, these past months, you've brought life back to my ranch, my home, and my heart." "I never thought I'd feel this way again." Rebecca's eyes softened. "I feel the same. After Daniel died, I thought that part of my life was over. I came west looking for independence, not love. And now," Zach asked, his heart racing. "Now I can't imagine my life without you," she admitted softly. Zach took a deep breath, suddenly certain of what he wanted, what he needed to do. "I don't want to imagine it either." He shifted to one knee, still holding her hand. "Rebecca Morgan, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Rebecca's eyes widened, filling with tears. For a terrible moment, Zach feared he'd misread her feelings, moved too quickly. Then she smiled, a radiant expression that dispelled his doubts. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Zach, I will marry you." Joy coursed through him as he pulled her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and companionship. When they finally parted, both were laughing and crying at once, overwhelmed by the moment's perfection. "I don't have a ring," Zach realized suddenly. "I should have planned this better." Rebecca shook her head, her smile undimmed. "I don't need a ring. All I need is you and this life we're building together." They remained on the ridge until sunset, making plans for their future. They would marry in September after the fall roundup. Rebecca would continue helping with the ranch's business affairs, a role she had come to love. Perhaps in time, there would be children to fill the too quiet house with laughter again. As they rode back to the ranch house in the gathering dusk, Zach felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The grief that had defined him for so long hadn't disappeared, it had transformed, becoming part of the foundation upon which he and Rebecca would build their life together. That night, before retiring to his room, Zach visited Sarah's grave one last time as an unmarried man. The stars shone brightly overhead as he stood before the simple cross. "I'm getting married, Sarah," he said softly. "Her name is Rebecca, and I think you would have liked her. She's strong and kind like you were." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'll always love you. You were my first love, the mother of our son, and nothing will ever change that. But I've found room in my heart for Rebecca, too. I hope, wherever you are, you understand." A gentle breeze stirred the wildflowers growing around the grave, and Zach felt, for the first time, a sense of Sarah's blessing. Not her ghost or spirit, perhaps, but the essence of her love for him, a love that had always wanted his happiness above all else. News of their engagement spread quickly through the county. Eleanor Jensen was the first to visit, embracing Rebecca with tears of joy and telling Zach with mock severity that it was about time. Other neighbors followed, bearing gifts and well wishes. Even Rebecca's former employer sent a telegram of congratulation when they announced their marriage plans in the county newspaper. The Morgan family maintained their silence, a fact that saddened Rebecca but didn't surprise her. "They'll come around eventually," she said with more hope than conviction. "Or they won't. Either way, we'll build our own family here." September brought cooler temperatures, and the fall roundup a busy time on the ranch as cattle were gathered, counted, and some selected for market. Zach worked from dawn until dusk, grateful for the capable hands who had stayed with him through the difficult years after Sarah's death. Between the demands of the roundup and preparations for the wedding, Zach and Rebecca had little time together. Yet each evening, no matter how exhausted, they made a point of sharing at least an hour on the porch, talking about their day and their plans for the future. 1 week before the wedding, as Zach returned from town with supplies, he found an unexpected visitor waiting at the ranch house. A slender woman in a traveling suit stood on the porch beside Rebecca, the two engaged in animated conversation. As Zach approached, Rebecca turned, her face alight with joy. "Zach, look who's come all this way for our wedding." The visitor turned, and Zach recognized her immediately from the photograph Rebecca kept by her bed. Her younger sister, Ruth. "Mr. Harrington," Ruth said, extending her hand. "I'm so pleased to finally meet you. Rebecca's letters have been full of nothing but praise." Zach smiled, taking her hand. "Please call me Zach, and the praise goes both ways. Rebecca speaks of you often." Ruth's presence was a welcome surprise, bringing Rebecca immeasurable joy in the days leading up to the wedding. The sisters stayed up late into the night, catching up on the years they'd spent apart and making final preparations for the ceremony. Father Morgan tried to prevent her from coming. Rebecca confided to Zach one evening as they watched Ruth chatting with Hank by the corral. Threatened to cut off her access to Boston society if she attended the wedding of a runaway widow. Zach frowned. Yet she came anyway. Rebecca smiled proudly. "Ruth has always had a rebellious streak, and she never approved of how the Morgans treated me after Daniel died." The wedding day dawned clear and cool, with a hint of autumn in the air. At Rebecca's request, the ceremony was held outdoors, near the ridge where Zach had proposed. A simple arch of wildflowers marked the spot where they would exchange vows, and benches had been arranged for the guests' neighbors, friends, and ranch hands who had become like family. Zach stood beneath the arch, wearing his best suit and feeling a mixture of nervous anticipation and profound joy. Beside him, the preacher from Sweetwater offered an encouraging smile. "Ready, son?" he asked quietly. Zach nodded, his eyes fixed on the path where Rebecca would appear. "More than ready." A soft murmur rippled through the gathered guests, and Zach looked up to see Ruth walking toward the arch, a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. And then, behind her, came Rebecca. She wore a simple dress of ivory satin, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders and adorned with a crown of wildflowers. She carried no bouquet, her hands free as she walked the path alone, independent to the last. As she approached, their eyes met, and the world seemed to fall away. In that moment, Zach saw not only their future but also the beauty of their past, the losses that had shaped them, the courage that had brought them together, and the love that had healed them both. Rebecca reached him, taking his outstretched hands in hers. "Hello," she whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Hello," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. The preacher began the ceremony, his words floating on the clear autumn air as Zach and Rebecca stood before their community, pledging their lives to each other. When the time came for vows, they had chosen to speak from the heart rather than recite traditional promises. "Rebecca," Zach began, his voice steady despite the emotion welling within him. "3 years ago, I thought my capacity for joy had ended. I existed rather than lived, until the day you arrived at my gate. You brought light back into my darkness, purpose to my days, and love to a heart I thought was beyond healing. I promise to honor the gift of your love, to stand beside you through whatever life brings, and to cherish each day we're granted together." Rebecca blinked back tears as she spoke her own vows. "Zach, I came west seeking independence, but found something far more precious, a partner who values my strength rather than fearing it, who supports my dreams while sharing his own. You've taught me that love isn't a cage but a sanctuary, a place where we can both grow and thrive. I promise to face each day by your side, to build our life with courage and joy, and to love you faithfully for all the days we're given." They exchanged simple gold bands, the metal warm from being carried close to their hearts. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zach drew Rebecca into his arms, sealing their union with a kiss that spoke of passion, tenderness, and the promise of a lifetime together. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. Tables laden with food stretched across the ranch yard, lanterns hung from trees, and a small band played as couples danced beneath the stars. Zach and Rebecca moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and sharing their joy. As the evening progressed, Zach noticed Rebecca speaking with an unexpected guest, Thomas Morgan, the younger of her brothers-in-law, who stood awkwardly at the edge of the gathering. Later, Rebecca explained, "He came to offer an olive branch of sorts. His father doesn't know he's here, but Thomas wanted me to know that not all the Morgans condemn my choices." "That was brave of him," Zach observed. Rebecca nodded. "Perhaps it's the beginning of healing that rift. I hope so, for Ruth's sake as much as my own." When the last guests had departed and Ruth had retired to her room, Zach and Rebecca stood alone on the porch of what was now truly their home. The night was clear, the stars brilliant in the vast Wyoming sky. "Mrs. Harrington," Zach said softly, drawing her into his arms, "how does it feel?" Rebecca smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Like coming home, like the beginning of the greatest adventure of my life." "Our life," he corrected gently. "Our life," she agreed, reaching up to touch his face. "I love you, Zach Harrington. And I love you, Rebecca Harrington." They sealed the words with a kiss, standing at the threshold of their shared future, two hearts that had known profound loss, found unexpected love, and embraced the courage to begin again. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Rebecca's business acumen complementing Zach's practical knowledge of cattle and land. They expanded their holdings, built a larger barn, and added modern conveniences to the house as they became available. In the spring following their marriage, Rebecca gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Ruth, honoring both the past and present. 2 years later, a son joined their family, Daniel Zachary, another bridge between what had been lost and what had been found. Through it all, they maintained the small family plot on the hill, teaching their children to honor the memory of those who had gone before while embracing the fullness of their own lives. On the anniversary of Sarah's death, they would visit her grave together, placing wildflowers and sharing stories of the vibrant young woman who had first brought love to the Rafter H Ranch. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they stood on the ridge overlooking their thriving ranch, Zach pulled Rebecca close. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Leaving Boston, coming to this wilderness?" Rebecca laughed, the sound carried on the wind across the valley. "Never. Not for a single moment." She turned in his arms, her face alight with happiness. "This is where I was meant to be, with you, with our children, building this life together." Zach kissed her, still marveling at the journey that had brought them to this point, a journey of loss and healing, of courage and love. A journey that had begun with a grief-stricken rancher and a determined Boston widow, each seeking something they couldn't name until they found it in each other. "I love you, Rebecca Harrington," he whispered against her lips. "And I love you," she replied, "today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." As the sun set over the Wyoming plains, casting long shadows across the land they both loved, Zach and Rebecca walked hand in hand back to the house where their children waited, the house that had once echoed with loneliness, but now rang with laughter and life. The past remained honored in their hearts, but it was the future, their future together, that beckoned with endless promise. And in that moment, as in all the moments that would follow, they were exactly where they were meant to be, two souls who had found in each other not just love, but the courage to embrace life's second chances.